Um, Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial's One's Belonging series, where we explore the lived experiences of individuals from the Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, stories which help us to understand their sense of identity, their sense of belonging in their different environments. And I say this every week, and every week I mean it. It's a real privilege to have our guest with us this week. Her story is amazing. She is Jade Dunn, and Jade is a career coach with a fertility lens, a speaker, and she likes to help people balance fertility challenges within the career. I'm not going to say anymore. I'm going to allow Jade to share her story with us. So Jade, welcome to Belonging. I'm going to just ask my first question, which is my usual question. Can you tell us what it was or what it is that helped to give you your sense of identity and sense of belonging as you were growing up?
Yeah, so when you asked me this earlier on in the week, Wayne, it really got me thinking. I was like, oh my God, can I remember? Because it's such a long time ago growing up, isn't it? So much has happened since then. But it's actually been quite nice to reflect on, all those, way back when, all those years ago, and, how all of those different experiences, I guess, shape who I am now. So so my background, so I grew up in Ilford, which, if you don't know, Ilford is I guess borderline between Essex and East London. And when I was young, if you were very cool, you would say you were from East London, or if you're a realist and honest like me, I would say I was from Essex, because it's actually Essex and there's nothing wrong with that at all. And when I was very young, like the primary school that I went to, I was very lucky in the sense that it was very, very multicultural. And I don't mean multicultural as in like it was like everybody looked like me. I mean, it was like truly multicultural, like you had every race in that school, which I know not everybody has that experience. So I think I was really, really lucky in that sense. And that definitely wasn't my experience when I went to secondary school, because I went to secondary school much further into Essex, and I was one of very few brown faces in secondary school. So, how lovely that I had that really nice sort of formative, first few years of my life where I got to, be part of a melting pot. And, obviously I was very young, and I knew that racism existed, and I knew that, there was this thing called the BMP that you'd hear about and stuff like that. But that wasn't my experience growing up. It was a really nice kind of multicultural experience. But within that melting pot, I'm South African. So, whilst all of my friends had at least like a few other kids in school who were part of their communities, I didn't really have that. I was like, there weren't many South Africans or any South Africans that I knew when I was very young. So that gave me, I think, a really strong sense of identity. Like all my friends were eating like cultural food, like if you think about like jollof rice or Caribbean food that my friends were eating, etc. Like I didn't have that in my household, I think because my grandparents, if I'm really honest, my grandmother came over in the late 50s, and she had a very privileged lifestyle back in South Africa, so she didn't need to cook. So she came over here and couldn't cook. So there were no like South African like traditional recipes or anything like that was passed down to me, but I still had this very kind of strong sense of being South African. And you'd hear them talking about South Africa being, referred to as back home, and that's very much how I thought of it, as being back home, even though I had never been there and I was second generation. But even within my little household, I think about kind of how South African I felt when I was very young. But even within my little household, there were still lots of like differences. So what do I mean by that? I mean, like on my mum's side, they were what you would, ethnicity wise, they were what you would call, back in South Africa, you would call Cape coloured, i.e. not white, not black, mixed. So if you were mixed in South Africa, you were called Cape coloured. But on my dad's side, he spent most of his childhood in Johannesburg, but he was actually born in Zimbabwe. He was black, came over to the UK when I think he was in like his mid-teens, lived in Essex. So even in my household, you had like people who were second generation, me, my mum, first generation UK, and then my grandparents and my dad had like really different experiences of apartheid South Africa. So all these really interesting contrasts in my household. But we were kind of all, I guess, unified by our Southern Africanness, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But we were also very Essex as well. So even that, I think, is a really interesting contrast. Like my dad had this really thick Cockney accent, and my grandparents, they, you know, their accents never changed. They had very kind of strong South African accents right up until, you know, they passed. But they were very much part of the Ilford community. So if I think about going back to talking about where I was from, Ilford, my grandparents were like part of the Ilford Catholic Club, and they were like, you know, very kind of part of the fabric of the Ilford community. So we were very, very Essex. So I think it's been really interesting to think about kind of all of those different contrasts and how, you know, you can feel very different, but also all of those differences and contrasts can actually make you feel, they can shape you and they can make you feel quite comfortable in a sense.
Yeah. So you mentioned about the fact that unlike your other friends who had, they could relate, there was at least 2 or 3 of them who had kind of like similar cultural backgrounds. Since you didn't, in primary school anyhow, since you didn't have that, how did that make you feel about your South Africanness as such? Or did you not really think
know any
about it?
different. I just didn't know any different. So I, like, there are still words that I use. My grandparents spoke English, but they spoke to each other in Afrikaans.
Yeah.
And there are like still words that I use that like are like idioms, I guess, that I use that are from them. So I just felt like I didn't really think, oh, like I'm lonely because I'm South African, nobody else is. That was just like, that was just my world. I don't think I knew any different.
And then, and the children, they didn't treat you any differently? You were all just kids together? How was that?
And that's what I mean about how lovely it was that Ilford was so multicultural. And like, I think about different, because I don't live there now, I live in Streatham. I think about different places that I've lived and different parts of London that I've lived, where you'll have like a very strong like ethnic community. Ilford wasn't like that. You had everybody. So it didn't matter if you were different.
Yeah.
Because everybody was different, if that made sense.
Okay. So there wasn't what you would call as a norm, because everybody was different.
Exactly.
So you
that.
celebrated each other's differences and got to know each other. Well, kind of like got to know that difference is okay.
Exactly. Like super comfortable with it. And like that was just normal to me. Like I don't think I had a conscious like awareness of that. It was just normal to me. So if I think about comparing that to like my husband's from West Oxfordshire, and West Oxfordshire is not multicultural in the slightest. So when he talks about his childhood, when we talk about kind of the differences between our childhoods, I thought that was normal, the way that I grew up. It's only now that I'm like, no, that's not normal at all. That's not the experience that everybody has. So I just didn't know any different at the time.
It's hard. It's interesting that you say normal, because normal means different things to different people based on their excuse me, based on their environment and the situation that they find themselves, and that becomes the normal. Yeah. So you mentioned that when you went into secondary school, you went kind of like deeper into Essex, and so now, whereas it was very multicultural in your primary school, in your secondary school, it was, you were one of very few. How did that make you feel? How was that for you?
So I think you just adapt, don't you? So, I mean, secondary school, I wanted to go to a different secondary school because I wanted to go to the one where all my friends went, and that didn't happen. So that was already quite scary. And then obviously when you go there and you get there and you realize that you're one of very few people who look like you, that makes it, I guess, a little bit scarier. But when you're young, you just adapt very, very quickly, I guess, because you have to. I did notice where everybody mixed in primary school because we were all different. I did notice in secondary school you had these little cliques, and quite often the cliques would be like you'd stick with your ethnicity, which is like, that's fine, you stick with what you know. But I had just never noticed that before, that that's what we did as minorities. Like I had never become aware that that's what we did as minorities. So that felt very, very different. But you just adapt, don't you?
And so what was school like for you in terms of, did you enjoy school? What was the teachers and the rest of, were they encouraging? Did they give you kind of like sense of you can do what you want to do? What was it like for you?
What was I like in school? I was a bit nerdy. I was a bit nerdy. I was quite studious. And I always reading, and that was something that sort of I got from my mum, really. Always had my head in a book. I was in all of the top sets, I think. So yeah, I was pretty studious. But I didn't do anything with that in school. So like when you ask about kind of did they encourage you, like I remember having conversations about kind of going to university, but they didn't mean anything to me, I think, when I was having those conversations. And what do I mean when I say they didn't mean anything to me? Maybe because no one in my family had gone to university. Most of my friends probably weren't going off to university as well. Like they just felt like very surface level conversations. Like it was kind of something that somebody else went and did. And nobody, I don't remember anyone saying like, this is absolutely what you should do because you're smart, because you're clever, and because you can. Like it just felt like something that the other girls in the top sets were more than likely going to do, but that wasn't something that I was going to do, and that was fine. So I don't know that it's that people discouraged me, but I just don't think people noticed me being less engaged, I guess. It wasn't like that the school was bad. I just think that they didn't notice me not being engaged.
Oh, okay. So based on that, then, did you have any other kind of like role models, anyone else around who would say to you, have you thought about going to university, or what was the environment which you were in, which kind of like was kind of like helping to set your trajectory where you were going to go, or what you were going to do next after school?
Yeah, I don't remember. We talked about this the other day, Wayne, and I don't remember really knowing what I was going to do or what was open to me, or like, not in the same way, because where I ended up in my career, I ended up in doing graduate recruitment within banking. And so then when I speak to graduates as I'm recruiting them as a grown-up now, like when I was sort of in my mid-30s, I talk to these grads and I think I don't remember being as confident and as aware of what the opportunities were when I was younger. And I don't know why that was. I just didn't see it, I guess. I didn't see it around me, and I didn't like, that's not to kind of be disparaging around kind of like my family or anything like that, but none of my family went to university. My dad worked in retail. My mum worked for Commission for Racial Equality. She had like a really good job actually, but she didn't go to university. So I didn't have those role models. I didn't have that kind of blueprint to follow. Not to be kind of woe is me or anything like that at all, because I think I've done pretty well regardless. But I didn't know what I was missing out on, because it just wasn't a thing. It wasn't part of our kind of normal parlay, I guess, as teenagers.
Yeah, it wasn't in your frame of reference. It was, your friends weren't talking about it. The teachers weren't really telling you about it. Your family, no one had actually gone through. So therefore,
and that's not to say my mum didn't want me to go to university. So she did. She definitely did. And she definitely, when I made the decision when I was 16 years old. They don't let you leave school when you're 16 now. Like, thank God, because you're a child. But they did. When I left school, they did let you leave school then. And I remember when I made that decision, my mum was like, but you're supposed to go. I don't think she realized how disengaged I was. So it was a surprise to her. I think she just assumed that I would, because I was smart and in all the top sets, that's the trajectory I was on. So I know that she wanted me to go. But again, I just think it's just maybe kind of parents, school, just not noticing that it wasn't clicking for me.
Yeah. So what did you do then? Since at that point where you decided, either through disengagement or whatever, that you weren't going to be going, excuse me, that you weren't going to go to university or even continue your formal education, what did you decide to do?
I thought I was going to make loads of money. I thought, well, now that I'm not in school, I've got all this time to earn, and I'm going to make loads and loads of money, and I'm going to be able to kind of like prove myself and move out of home and buy a flat. And I mean, you're just a fool when you're 16, aren't you? And none of that happened until I was in my early 20s. I didn't move out till I was in my early 20s, so I might as well have gone to uni in that time. But what did I actually do? So I did everything. I started in retail. I worked in good old Tesco's, which is where my grandmother worked, actually.
Right.
And I worked in Dorothy Perkins, but I really felt like I'd gone up in the world because I worked in Dorothy Perkins in the West End, so I wasn't
Right.
working the local one.
Yeah.
Getting the train to work. And then I worked in gyms as well. I sold gym memberships, and that's where like my career eventually went into recruitment. So how did I get into recruitment? That was because I sold gym memberships, and that was kind of a very much a sales-based job, commission-based job. So it worked out that I had like the patter, the gift to the gab, as it were. And then found myself in agency recruitment. So I would be the person when you're looking for a role that you call up, you send your CV to, and then they send your CV out to all of the different employers that they have on their books, etc. So I kind of worked my way up, I guess, from retail work to working in an office, having an office job, and I worked in recruitment, and from there I found myself working in graduate recruitment within banking. So in a round, which was definitely kind of everybody that I worked with was a grad, and it was definitely a graduate's environment, I guess. So in a roundabout way, I got myself there, but I just took a
more windy route.
Exactly, yeah.
So when you were then like looking at these when you were trying to place graduates on their thing, as part of your role, and you were looking at these graduates, did you think to yourself, I could have done that, or anything like that, or what how did it make you feel in that sense?
It was a really weird feeling, because when you're recruiting grads and you haven't been to university, there definitely is a sense of, it took a while to I don't think I ever wanted to admit that I did admit that I hadn't been to university, but there was a hesitance, I guess, in sort of speaking to people who were graduates. And there's a bit of, not inferiority, because I've never felt inferior to anybody, but like a little bit of like, oh, do I belong here? Or are they going to know? Can they tell I haven't been to university because of the way I talk? Am I giving anything away? I don't know if that's inferiority or just being very aware of the difference between us. But then, like, very quickly thinking, but could I have done that? Yeah, I could have done that. And am I smart enough to have done that? Yeah, I am. I just didn't. I just took a different path, I think that working in banking was definitely the first time that I felt like I've got a way to go because I didn't go to university. Like, I think when I did agency recruitment, I worked very much like that's, people come out of university and they go into agency recruitment in that industry. So it's a graduate's job. And I was one of very few, in fact, I don't think anybody hadn't been to university apart from me. But I didn't notice it. I didn't feel it because it was about being a good salesperson.
Yeah.
It didn't matter. Whereas when I stepped into banking, I suddenly felt like, oh, it really matters to these people. Like, because they recruit grads, right?
Yeah.
They recruit grads from the top. At that time, it wasn't as much about kind of social mobility as it is now. They recruit grads from the top universities, and it really matters to the people that I'm working for that you are of a certain caliber of kind of education and person and background and social skills, etc. And I definitely started to think, oh, I've got a way to go here.
Did you have a way to go? Did you really have a way to go though? Because
in hindsight, no, I don't think I did have.
Right. This is what I was wondering
at the time, because I would have been like, what, in my mid-20s.
Yeah.
So I felt like I was a little bit of a fish out of water.
Okay, because the whole idea about belonging is that, and you kind of like mentioned it quite nicely in that you said that it was what people's perception, the people around you, that they felt it was important without necessarily looking at the skill sets to say, the fact that this person is doing a fantastic job, right? Which was more important, the fact that they got a degree from a top university, or the fact that they could do the job effectively and do it when it's necessary, you
Yeah.
know? So the question is where is the value, I suppose, is what I'm thinking of, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, look, don't get me wrong, like if you're going to go off and you're going to be, you know, a derivatives trader, you need to have, you know, you need to be very kind of, you know, have, you know, quantitative ability, and you get that from your, you know, years of study. So don't get me wrong, there's like, there is a reason they recruit people with certain backgrounds, but I just think that the irony of kind of me going onto campus and saying, this is what we're looking for, and me not being that wasn't lost on me.
Okay. So yeah, kind of like that. I want to kind of like understand what you're doing now and how you got to where you've got to now, if that makes sense.
Because it's
Yeah.
very different.
Yeah.
Really, really different. So I worked in graduate recruitment for a really long time and loved it, actually. Really loved it. It's a great job. It's a great job because you give people opportunities, or actually that's, I don't want to give myself too much credit. You don't give people opportunities. You're there and you're showing them what the opportunities are. And one of the other reasons that I really love that job is that in the time space that I was doing that job, you definitely saw like a change in attitude, change in hearts and minds in the industry, where it was like less about going to the top universities and more about kind of thinking, right, well, if we want to make our organizations more diverse, we need to be more diverse in the types of people that we're recruiting. We need to look at people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. We need to look at people from different ethnicities, etc. Banks need to work harder to find people from those backgrounds. And it was really like, I really love being part of those projects. I really felt like I was doing, not to sound too grandiose, but like meaningful work. I felt like I was kind of really showing people that you belong here. If I can get into this organization, I know I'm doing a HR job, which is a bit different, but if I can get into this organization, if I can belong here, you can too. So I loved it. But there definitely was a point after, you know, so many years, I'd done it for a really long time, and definitely thought, I feel like I need a change. I don't know what that change should be. And I was thinking, do I want to kind of change jobs and work like for a different organization? Do I want to change jobs within the organization that I was working in, into a new HR role? But at the time when I was feeling like I needed this bit of change, I actually went through my own fertility challenges, which just really span everything on its head. So whilst you're thinking about kind of your own career and personal development, whilst you're doing that and thinking, I want to progress and I want to be, you know, you're aspirational. When you've also got these fertility challenges going on in the background, it makes it really difficult to focus on both things, because they're both quite, you know, energy, emotionally, physically, all consuming. And, you know, it was taking us a very, very long time to get pregnant, and that was really affecting kind of our, you know, my mental health. Eventually we did get pregnant, and I suffered a pregnancy loss, which of course that affected my mental health as well. All of this whilst I'm still having this kind of like, what do I do with my career stuff going on in the background. I went through IVF. I went through 7 rounds of fertility treatment, which is, you know, pretty relentless. So whilst all of this is happening, I'm thinking, gosh, this is hard. This is hard to balance these two things. And I know I'm not the only person who experiences this kind of real, like, you feel quite stuck in your career. You feel like your fertility and everything that's going on with your fertility and your inability to do the thing, you know, grow your family, is making you feel like you're stuck in your career, because it affects your mental health, it affects your confidence, it affects your, sometimes if you feel like you want to leave the job, you feel like you can't leave because you're waiting for that maternity, all of these things. Like the two, it's like oil and water when you're trying to put career and fertility together. They don't blend well at all. So whilst I was going through this kind of real conflict between my personal life and my professional life, I was also, because I like to give myself challenges, I was also training to be a coach.
Right.
And I was training to be a coach to help my HR career, because I thought it would help me in terms of like my stakeholder management, etc. And it certainly would have done. But whilst I was doing this training, it was the best experience of my life, because it really helped me to understand what was happening to me. Why was my confidence where it was? Why was it so diminished as it was? And to forgive myself for that as well. And that helped me to then make decisions about where I wanted to take my career with a clarity that I had not had before, because I had so much swirling around kind of in my head. And as that happened, as I went through that coach training and I had that kind of personal transformation, I thought, oh my God, everybody needs this. I'm not the only person who's going through fertility challenges. It affects 1 in 6 people struggle to have a baby. 1 in 4 pregnancies end in pregnancy loss. There's so many of us out there that are going through the exact same, challenges that I was having in balancing it with your career. And I thought, well, if this coach training has been so transformational for me, I feel like I want to make sure everybody has the opportunity to have that experience where they're able to kind of just clear the muddy water that's in your head when you're trying to balance your fertility with your career. So that's when I decided that that's what I wanted to do. And I wanted to start my own business. You looked like you're about to ask a question. Go on.
Yeah, just before you go on to your business,
Sure.
throughout that journey, that because there's a transformational journey which you mentioned through the coaching, but there was also this conflicting journey which you had to go through in terms of fertility and career. During that time, did you have anybody, colleagues, anyone who you in the workplace or elsewhere where you could actually confide or talk to about the journey that you were on?
This is what's so interesting about your fertility challenges, is that initially, no, because you don't talk about, it's not like tea room chat, is it? It's not the kind of thing that you chit chat about in the tea room. But when you do go through like a pregnancy loss, you feel like you have to talk about it, because you feel like, what I did personally, feel like I have to explain why I'm taking so much time off work, or why I feel so tearful, or so you find people that you do eventually confide in, your manager, for example. And then when I was kind of going through like the whole IVF thing, like there was somebody in my team who we didn't really speak about kind of fertility and things like that, who I saw at the clinic, bumped into at the kind of the same clinic. So it's weird that we don't talk about it when we're so close and we're all going, like there are so many of us that are kind of going through it. I find that a really strange kind of circumstance. I was really lucky in the sense that I was able to be very open with my manager about the fact that I was going through IVF. Which meant I could be quite transparent about how I was finding that difficult as well. And I was really lucky in the sense that, she had knowledge of the whole IVF process. So I didn't have to spend time explaining to her, this is how it's making me feel. And I have to go to, this many appointments and, really have to explain in granular detail what was going on, because she knew all of that stuff. So I was really lucky, but not everybody has that, and I think that's such a shame. So I've heard people tell me in the work that I'm doing now, I've heard people tell me, well, I can't talk to my manager because they're a guy, or I can't talk to my manager because I'm worried that they're going to think that I'm about to leave because I'm going to get pregnant, or I don't actually get fertility leave. So I don't want for them to think that I tell them that I've got like hospital appointments and things like that. I don't tell them exactly why I'm going off. So I'm not able to kind of be transparent about what's actually happening. So I don't think it should be potluck, the experience that I had around kind of being able to communicate it. I think that's a real shame about the workplace, actually, that we don't have this language. It's still taboo,
Yeah. So is that part of your motive? Was that part of your motivation to say, I want more people to know about this. I want more people discussing. What was it that then got you into say, right, I'm going to take this particular stance?
Yeah, I didn't know, Wayne, how hard it was going to be. I had no flipping idea how hard it was going to be. Like first of all, I didn't know that so many pregnancies and 1 in 4 pregnancies end in pregnancy loss. I didn't know that at all. I just thought that you get pregnant and that's that. I didn't know that it would be so hard to balance it with work. I didn't, like, when you work in HR, like I remember we would organize these talks with senior leaders for our grads, and you'd always have like a senior woman on the panel because you want a diverse panel. And someone would always invariably ask the question to that senior female of like, how do you balance, you know, having a family with being a senior, like how do you balance being like a working mother, I guess. So you have these like examples in your mind of where people talk about how to be like a working mother and be successful. But I don't remember anyone ever saying, this is how to struggle to become a mother and still be successful and manage your career. No one ever explained any of that to you. Nobody talks about it. It's really, really taboo. Nobody feels comfortable talking about it. And I think if we did feel more comfortable talking about it, it would make it easier for us to learn from one another's mistakes. It would make it easier for managers to respond in the right way when their employee tells them what's going on. And that's not to say that everybody should talk about it, because they're really deeply personal, like life events. And I talk about it a lot because of the work that I do now.
Yeah.
But not everybody feels comfortable talking about it. And I think that employers, I think that they should, you know, they should be aware that these things go on and these things affect employees, but also accept that maybe the employee might not necessarily always tell them exactly what's happening, but you can still impact someone's experience even if you don't know who the individual is, by just signaling to your workforce that it's okay for you to have stuff going on outside of work. It's okay for you to be a human, to be fallible, to have fertility challenges, and to be a bit broken by that, and we will still wrap our arms around you. There's still ways to signal that.
That I find that really fascinating. And from the discussion, I'm hearing it very much from the female lens, because that's where most fertility issues, or not most that's where most people think about it, the perception. But have you had clients where it may be male infertility, and how do they compare and contrast, if that makes sense?
It's so with infertility, it's like, I think it's 50% of cases are male factor, but you're quite right in that the perception is that it's a woman's issue. When I talk to employers and when I'm kind of talking about what I do and, you know, pitching to speak or to work with them, I think sometimes the response sometimes can be, let's put it in with our kind of gender diversity work, or let's wrap it in with like the women's network stuff. I said, yeah, there is a place for that, and I am a woman and it did affect me, so I get why you would put that there, but in actual fact it does affect men.
Yeah.
It does affect men because it happens to men as well, in that it can be male factor. And also, even when it isn't male factor, if you're talking about heterosexual relationships, it affects the man as well. Like if I think about my own situation, like Graham was going through all of that with me. And also when I think about kind of how I took a period of time off for my pregnancy losses, he didn't. That's strange about us as a society. I think that's, you know, we both experienced that loss. And when I think about kind of how, and I've clients and lots of people have said this to me, that's been their experience as well, when someone asks their partner about a pregnancy loss, they always start with, how is she? And it's like, that's a shame as well. Why are we not asking, how are you? It's their loss also.
Yeah, absolutely. So because that then I think in framing it as it's not just a female issue, it's both, I think that would open up society to have more open discussions about it, and not almost like other it. It's the women's issues, it's not male issues, because it's both, as you rightly said. Right.
And of all of us speaking about this, because, you know, you have to be a bit brave when you talk about kind of your fertility and your fertility, your virility, your, you know, you do have to be a bit brave. And I talk about it a lot on LinkedIn, and, you know, really had to rip the plaster off to actually admit to the world that this is what was going on. But I had to admit it because it's my business. But of all of us talking about it, it's not a diverse community talking about it. So there are a few it's called the Trying to Conceive community, TTC community. There are very few brown faces talking about fertility. It affects all of us. There are very few men talking about fertility, and it affects men as well. And I think that's a shame as well. So I think it's important. I think it's important for us, if you do go through it and you do feel brave enough to talk about it, because it encourages other people to do so as well. And then you don't have this perception that it just affects white women, which if you went through Instagram and you had hashtag TTC, you would think it just affects white women.
I'm gonna ask you then, what is it that enabled you to say, I'm going to stand up and talk about this? Because you did say that it was, but there's one thing about saying it was challenging, but why did you then say, you know what, I'm going to actually put my head above the parapet and I'm going to tell people about this, even though it's deeply personal?
Yeah, it was really hard. I won't lie to you, I was like pooping my pants before I kind of said it on LinkedIn. I think it built up though, it was quite gradual. So I had this like epiphany that there is a need for people to coach around fertility in relation to work. So I knew that was a good idea for a business and for a niche. And I knew that I was very confident that was the direction I wanted to go. And the more people I spoke to who had been through what I've been through, they kind of confirmed that for me. So they were like, yeah, absolutely, that's what I would have needed. So that kind of builds your confidence. And the more you start talking about it and you realize that I can talk about it quite fluently and not kind of, choke up, or then you get more confident, and you get more confident to be able to kind of do it again and again and again. But that's talking to people who know, because they've been through it. I think talking to people who don't know and won't necessarily understand straight away, that it does require me to be quite vulnerable, and that's where I was pooping my pants. So I had the idea, way back when, and I remember speaking to someone who was on my coach training course, and she said, Jade, and I was talking about how nervous I was, and she said, Jade, sometimes it's easier to talk about things coming from like a healed scar than it is talking from an open wound. So maybe it's quite close to, your recent IVF rounds, you're probably still feeling quite emotional. Maybe you're just not ready yet. And I'm so glad that I had that conversation, because she was right. And I took a bit of a pause. I was like, right, I've got this great idea, sit on it, grow it in your mind, but don't put it out there in the world just yet till you feel ready. And then, then eventually I did feel ready. I was still pooping my pants before putting it on LinkedIn, because you're talking to your ex-colleagues about what you've been through, and you're being vulnerable in a way that not everybody knew what I had been through. Not everybody. You're talking essentially about your womb to people, and people that you'd never normally have those kind of conversations with. But once I had done it, I don't know what made me kind of overcome it, but I just knew that if I want to grow my business, I need to talk about it. So I think it was more of a necessity than bravery. But once I had done it and I put my first post out there, I remember just saying, right, putting my phone down and saying, right, I'm going to go out and walk the dog, and I'm not going to look at my phone again for a couple of hours. And I came back to these messages, reams and reams of messages that were on, not just under the post, but people sending me direct messages, colleagues that I didn't know, ex-colleagues that I didn't know had gone through this as well, telling me their own stories, making themselves really vulnerable. It's all kind of really affirming for me that not only are you onto something, you're also not alone, and people understand. And anyone that doesn't understand, you're not talking to them anyway. It doesn't matter. So I kind of had to take the plunge.
Well, the point you just made, you may not be talking to them now, but they may well need it again in the future, in much the same way that your colleague had said to you, or your coach had said to you, you need to potentially just park this for a while, right? It was always there, but you might have to park it. It's the same way that some people may not actually think they need it, but in the future it may well come round that it's something which becomes much more personal to them in some way. They don't know yet, but it could be,
Yeah, exactly that. And I think that like one of the things I always say is like for people to kind of always lead with kindness, because you
Mm,
never know what somebody's going through outside of
mm,
work. And that doesn't just apply to like pregnancy loss and fertility
mm,
challenges. It applies to, you know, there's all sorts of things that go on in our personal lives. But I think sometimes we forget that as well. So I think
mm,
if you have people being very vulnerable in what is otherwise a very professional space, which LinkedIn is quite a professional space, isn't it?
mm,
If you have people being vulnerable and talking about the things that go on in their personal lives, hopefully it encourages people to just remember that,
mm.
you know, everyone's got stuff.
The thing about it is I think LinkedIn is the perfect place for it,
Mm,
because of what you're talking about. It's about balancing fertility challenges with a career. Now, LinkedIn is all about careers and people showing what they're doing, etc. And
mm,
so this is part of it, which is potentially affecting their productivity or whatever else, or just even their state of well-being. So I
mm.
think it's a perfect place for it, you know.
Yeah, and I think that like I think the workplace, even in the time that, you know, I've been in, you know, in the workplace, I think it is different now. I think we're a bit more, you know, our conversations around mental health are a bit more mature,
Mhm,
and people like bristle less when you
mhm,
talk about kind of mental health. And I think that now managers are a bit more open to the idea that the people they have working for them are not just resources that kind of clock in
mhm,
and do the work and then go home. They have
mhm.
stuff going on at home as well. And I also think that the pandemic has really helped us to almost literally, like you have now, have a window into our colleagues' lives, that it
Mm,
kind of almost softens our perspective. So I think that all of those things have really helped to like pave the way for people like myself to be a bit more open, a bit more vulnerable.
mm, mm. I'm just wondering, is there any questions from the audience? Is there anyone who would like to ask a question? Otherwise, I've got a few more questions which I'd like. But if there is, just raise your hands and then I'll come to you. But where to from here with your business? What's on the horizon, the immediate horizon for yourself, do you think?
Yeah, so I do one-to-one coaching. So I what is on the immediate horizon is that I just want to continue doing that. I love it.
Mhm,
I love seeing the transformation of my clients when they come to me, and they you know, they come and they're initially in very vulnerable position, in that they, you know, they might be a senior leader, but they feel like, can I do this anymore? Can people see through the fact that I'm feeling kind of not confident? How
mhm,
can I lead a team when I feel not confident anymore because of everything that's going on? And to see that transformation of people sort of coming through it and thinking, actually, I understand why my confidence has been, you know, they're giving themselves self-compassion
mhm,
and understanding why their confidence has been impacted. And then once they start to understand why their confidence has been impacted, they can then start to strengthen their leadership skills from that starting point. I love seeing that transition, and I really feel like I love being part of it as well. And you kind of get a real kind of sense of pride for that person, of like, look at where you are now, look at where you
yeah.
were, and look at where you are now. So what is, I just want to keep doing that.
Mhm,
But then on the side of that as well, what I really, really want to do is to get in with employers and start talking to them about how they need to change to make
mhm,
workplaces more accommodating for people who are going through this. As I said before, it's 1 in 6 people. That's a lot of the workforce,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Who are struggling with this and struggling with it in secret. So my intention, and I do this now, but I want to do more of it, is to do things like this:
Mhm,
webinars, speaking engagement, panel events within employers, so that I can help to raise awareness and help to start conversations, because that's where it all starts, right? That's where
mhm,
awareness starts, from conversation. And if I can trigger somebody within an organization to be vulnerable themselves, that will start to trickle down, and you start to see kind of culture change. And that's where I want to get to, is a place where, in the way that we talk about mental health now more than
yeah.
we ever used to, I want to get to a place where employers acknowledge that fertility challenges are something that impacts their people.
Yeah. And absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more as you were saying it. And I was thinking specifically about when you mentioned about fertility leave, um, and just knowing that you've got that space, and knowing that your employer's going to look not think, as you said, no longer just a commodity or just someone clocking in, clocking out, but actually seeing the whole individual and nurturing that whole individual. I think that's great. I'm going to ask probably my final couple of questions, right? Because it's been, I can see it's been a long journey on you. Not, you know, it's been, you had to come to terms with what was happening and everything like that. So based on that, if you were to give advice to your younger self, right, what advice would you give them? And then what response do you think your younger self would give you? What would they say? What would be their wow factor about where you are now and how far you've come?
That is a great question. I think the advice that I'd give my younger self would be to stop trying so hard. I think to stop trying so hard. Like, I think maybe because I didn't go to university, maybe because I was like always trying to, you know, scrap my way up. You know, I didn't go to university, but I knew that I wanted to be, you know, successful and keep progressing. And I was always kind of working really, really hard to do that and to prove myself as well. But I don't think I mean, it's good that I did that because I ended up where I've ended up, and I'm really proud of that. But you don't have to be perfect, and you don't have to worry so much about how other people perceive you. So just relax a little bit. I think that's the advice I'd kind of give myself. And also, like, you're never finished. You're never at the finished article. Like, and I don't see myself as finished now. I'm very much a work in progress, and there's nothing wrong with that as well. I think that's probably the message I give my younger self, that there's really nothing wrong with that. It's actually beautiful that you're not finished, and you have so much room to grow and so much room to continue becoming whatever you're going to be, and you'll keep becoming whatever you're going to be until you're really old. And I think that you lose sight of that when you're young. You want to be now. You want to finish now.
So take it easy on yourself. Recognize that you're still going through a process, and you're going to continually be going through processes. Yeah. And what would they turn around and say? Wow. What do you think that they would say?
I think that they would say, wow, about at how not uptight I am. How not uptight I've kind of become. So because I was always worried about kind of perception and wanting to kind of like do and achieve and prove that I didn't make a mistake by making the choices that I made. There is a bit of an uptightness about you, and kind of wanting to you know, you want to earn X amount of money. You're kind of looking over your shoulder at your neighbor in terms of like where you work, and like, are they getting promoted ahead of me? Like, there's always that kind of whereas I don't have that now, and I think that like that's really nice, and I think that I'd probably surprise my younger self that that's where I've ended up.
Fantastic. I love those. I do love those. Jade, I want to just say a big thank you for being our guest on Belonging this week. It really has been a true lesson in understanding about that whole fertility journey. And I want to wish you all the success with your business, you know.
Thank you.
Because I think it's well and truly very, very much needed, you know. And so, yeah, just a real big thank for sharing what you've done. Hopefully we can get you at Imperial to give some sessions.
I would love that.
I think that would be really quite a good thing to do, about raising awareness of it, and helping people to actually realize that it's okay to talk about it, and actually not just okay, it's actually necessary that we do talk about it, you know, because it is really something which has for too long gone under the radar. Okay, so it's just all the very best. That's what I'm saying. Right.
Oh, thank you so much, Wayne. Thank you so much for your words of encouragement as well. It really means a lot.
No worries. I'm going to just share with everyone what's going to be happening next week. And next week will be our final Belonging before the summer break. And next week, we're going to have Professor Julie McKinney, and she is one of the provost visiting professors of hematology, and she's from Tanzania, and she works specifically with sickle cell disease, and she's establishing a great network of resources to tackle and improve the life chances of individuals with sickle cell. So please come and join us and listen to her amazing story next week. If you have missed any of the other previous interviews, then go to our YouTube channel, which is tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO. And we've got a fair few on there now. So please have a look. Before I stop that one. Once again, I just want to say a big thank you to all of the many. This is our first 100. I'm working on the second 100 slide. All of these stories are just amazing stories, because everybody who's on this platform, everyone in this world really is amazing, and we do have amazing stories. We just need to share them a little bit more, and then people will actually see just how much we have in common and how much we really do belong. We are here. So until next week, everyone have a great weekend and continue to belong, because we all do. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Wayne.